Happy New Year, Hoosier fans, and welcome back to another episode of the House of Hoosier podcast here on the Field of 68. Be sure to go ahead and follow us on our socials at house_Hoosier. If you're new here, we discuss IU basketball every single week, bringing on various guests and talking about the Hoosiers each and every week. He's Ian Plaskoff. I'm Austin Platt. Our first guest of 2025 is IU Hoosier alum and now a man working in the Rutgers athletic department for the men's basketball team, Thomas Montalbano. Thomas, welcome to the House of Hoosier, man. This is like the dream game for you, Rutgers IU. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. I appreciate you guys reaching out and having me on. Yeah, I'm having a blast with Rutgers this year. As you mentioned, it is the dream game. It's probably my most anticipated game of the year. I'm obviously a Hoosier alum and I'm with Rutgers this year, so my loyalties are going to be a little bit tied, but should be a fun game regardless for me.
Absolutely. Obviously, Indiana coming off of a pair of gutsy non-conference wins, a little closer than we'd like, and Rutgers this season sitting at 8-5. They beat Columbia on Monday night, and obviously the star of the show was Dylan Harper, a triple double. Just to start, I mean, obviously all the attention's around Harper and Bailey. Rutgers have had some good seasons in the past, made it to the tournament in back-to-back years. Last year, just like IU, was a down year, but kind of just what's it been like around those two freshmen as they're really kind of the two top guys in that class.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're living up to the hype. They had a lot of expectations on them going into this season, and they've both been nothing short of tremendous. Dylan Harper is not only playing like the best freshman in the country, but the best player in the country. As you mentioned, he just had a triple double, the second in Rutgers program history, and the first in 41 years. So yeah, they've been tremendous. Ace Bailey is his shot taking and shot making ability is really a sight to see. And yeah, it's exciting. They got a lot of basketball to play in front of them, but they've been great so far.
I guess I mean just obviously Harper hits the buzzer beater a few weeks ago. I know that game against Princeton was tough, but I mean how have the guys just kind of adapted to the game and with the expectations so high, kind of how have you seen those two guys play together and with the rest of the team?
Yeah, I would say I'm not going to say this is Dylan Harper's team, but he's been in control almost every single game. He directs it. He's not a veteran, obviously he's a freshman, but he if you didn't know he was a freshman, you wouldn't know he's a freshman just by watching him. He's been really, really good, confident in almost every single play, has his hands on the ball almost every single play, and is involved one way or another. Ace Bailey is also playing super well. He's had a couple more freshman mistakes, I'd say, than Harper has, but they've both still been tremendous. Just got Harper's stats here. He's been averaging 22.8 points per game, 5.3 rebounds, and 4.8 assists. Bailey, on the other hand, is averaging 18.2 points, 7.6 rebounds. They're both shooting right around 50%, which is pretty good. Yeah, as a team, these guys have a lot of different parts, and they have a lot of different parts that you need to win games. They have 3-point shooters. They have good physical presence down in the paint. And they have great facilitators like Dylan Harper and Jamichael Davis, a sophomore veteran. So yeah, they got a lot of good pieces. As mentioned, they had a tough Princeton loss and a couple other tough, close losses, but still a lot of basketball left to play before March. And these guys are coming together. As we saw on Monday, they beat Columbia by 27, so they're feeling good going into Indiana.
Now, Thomas, are you under the impression or the feeling that in the grand scheme of things, this team will go as far as Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey will take them?
Like, yes and no. If these guys have a poor performance, I mean, especially both of them, then it's going to be pretty difficult for them to win a game. But at the same time, they need to win games with more than just the two of them. They're definitely two of the leaders on the team. They have all the national headlines and the spotlights and all of that, but at the same time, they're freshmen and they need help. They get double teamed a lot, and it takes some other guys to step up, especially on those double teams, and they outlet the ball to those 3-point shooters or some guys in the paint. They got to connect so they can also be threats and take some of the pressure off of Dylan and Ace. So I would say yes, in the sense that they need them to continue their strong play, and they're going to have a lot of the credit if they do get to March Madness. But at the same time, they do need more than just the two of them to go that way.
And then this is an important thing that I was looking at the schedule, and I'm looking at, I mean, you've seen all these games. Rutgers has beaten their group of five, their mid-major teams pretty handily. And then you look at the Power Five games, and whether it's a win or lose situation, every Power Five game that they have played has been within 5 points. So what is causing those wins versus losses? What does Rutgers do in the final stage of those games that takes it from a win to a loss or a loss to a win? What are you seeing when you see these games?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's tricky. They're still looking for consistency. Like for example, that Princeton game, that was a back and forth game the entire way. I think there was like 14 ties and 17 lead changes or something like that. Not exactly those numbers, but like they're playing a lot of very back and forth games, and a lot of it is just about closing the games out. And some of them have done really well, some of them they haven't. Princeton, they fell just short, but the game before that against Seton Hall, Dylan Harper hit the buzzer beater that I'm sure you guys saw. They need to be a little bit more consistent, and they need to have a little bit more help from the other guys, as I was mentioning. Another thing I'll say is like a game like Kennesaw State, that was a tough loss for Rutgers, and one that I'm sure they'd like to have back. They went into halftime down 18, opened up the half down 21, and then I think they scored 51 points in the second half and ended up losing by two. So they had a phenomenal second half, and but it was too big of a hole to come back from. So just the consistency, having a better first half, they probably win that game. Um, so they've been good, and they're coming into their own. They only have three guys on the roster from last year, so it's a very new team. They're great chemistry wise on and off the court. It's just a matter of fully clicking and fully getting to know each other's game. Um, but they're getting there.
I think of Rutgers, and I just think of defense with Steve Peichel, especially at home. Obviously, Jersey Mike's arena has somehow turned into where ranked teams go to die in the Big Ten. But kind of at home, the defense has been good. Away from home, neutral sites, and true road games, opposing teams are scoring high 70s, 80s, and some even in the 90s, which is so uncharacteristic, I feel like, of Rutgers teams. Kind of defensively, kind of, do you feel there's a big difference at home versus on the road? And obviously, a pair of tight games in Big Ten play so far, giving up 80 on the road to Ohio State. So, kind of, what's the defense kind of been like, and what is the difference, I guess, home versus road been like?
Yeah, so it's a good point you bring up. Steve Peichel, that's the number one thing he emphasizes: defense, defense, defense. He looks for defensive players. They just got four new recruits for next year, and all four of those guys are defensive minded guys. So that's the number one thing Steve Peichel looks for is defense. Yeah, it's an interesting point you bring up, home versus away. At home, they have the advantage of, like you just said, the rack. I had not been to the rack prior to this season, and it's incredible. It's Assembly Hall is very similar in terms of the noise it generates, but it's also different at the same time. But still, the same impact. It is a definite home court advantage. And yeah, the fans, the players say it all the time. Coach Peichel says it all the time. The fans act as a sixth man on the court. So you definitely can feel their presence, and that helps them out with the defense, and I'm sure rattles the away team a little bit. On the road, they obviously don't have that, and it's been evident in their defense. As you mentioned, 80 points to Ohio State, gave up 83 to Princeton. Um, I'd say they're definitely more comfortable at home. They have made that clear, and I think it shows in their play. But they are capable of doing good defense. I mean, they've been better rebounding the ball, both offensive rebounds and defensive rebounds. Dylan and Ace specifically have both been emphasizing their rebounds, and in the post-game press conference, Coach Michael talks about the rebounding and like that's the number one thing he talks about pretty much every single time is getting rebounds and getting defensive stops. He believes that that's what win games, and right behind him on that. But yeah, as you mentioned, like the home court advantage goes a long way for them.
I want to bring the focus onto the matchup specifically with Indiana, because Thomas, you've covered Indiana throughout your years at IU, although this is a much different team this year. But some of the same problems as we've talked about throughout the whole year, the same problems are sticking around with three-point shooting, effort, defense, sometimes rebounding. Where do you see a hole for Rutgers to fill where they can pull away from Indiana and try and exploit those problems?
Yeah. As you mentioned, for those of you that don't know me, I covered Indiana basketball last year for the Hoosier Network, which was a phenomenal opportunity, and one of the big parts of my sports media career. Um, I'll say this. Like, I've been following Indiana basketball this year as much as I can, definitely not as much as Rutgers, obviously, but last year, one of their biggest issues was three-point shooting. It seemed to be a glaring issue every single game. And Rutgers has three-point shooters almost 24/7. They have 4 out of 5 guys on the court that are very capable of hitting the three. And that's not only massive for their matchup against Indiana, but matchup in college basketball in general. Last year, it was a really, really big problem that seemed to be a talking point every single game and every single podcast episode I did with the other guys I covered the team with. But I'd say three-point shooting is huge and also getting rebounds. It's been a problem for Rutgers early on. They've been better as of recent, but getting rebounds, especially offensive rebounds, goes such a long way, especially in college basketball, and getting those second chance points and points in the paint. I'd say those are the two main things. Also, free throw shooting. You got to knock down your free throws. They're free. I think Indiana, as far as I remember, they weren't terrific at free throws last year either. And Rutgers can be better. Again, I'll say this: they were worse at the beginning of the year than they are now. They're definitely cleaning it up. But free throw shooting, they're free. You got to knock them down. And three-point shooting, I think, will be the biggest advantage for Rutgers, especially with an Indiana team that, as far as I was concerned, was struggling pretty heavily from deep.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm looking at the numbers right now. And you look back, I mean, I think it's 18% over the last three, but Indiana's coming off a 1 for 20 3-point performance against Winthrop
Oh
and
my,
a
I
5
did
for
not know
20
that.
performance against Chattanooga. And then looking at Rutgers, 11 for 34 against Columbia. And if I can get there quick enough, here we go. Princeton, they were 9 for 27. So usually, you know, at least in the last few games, 9 to 11, around 10 free throws a game. Indiana struggling mightily. That might be, I don't think there can be anything that's not an understatement when it comes to Indiana's three-point shooting struggles over the last few. So that was what I looked at for sure. And that's why I asked that question, is just because basketball nowadays is all about the three-point shot, and that's something that Indiana has struggled with. That's what these high-level players um, like Harper and Bailey are good at and good at facilitating, and Indiana has just struggled with that mightily this year.
Yeah, and something I'll add, I mean, it seems like it's pretty similar to last year with those numbers. I didn't realize it was that brutal. But Dylan Harper, like he had a triple double last night. We're recording this on Tuesday, so Monday against Columbia. He had a triple double last night, only 16 points, but 12 of those points came off threes. He had 4 threes. So they're super capable. And there's a couple other guys. A couple other guys have kind of been struggling a little bit as of recently, but they have other three-point shooters. PJ Hayes, I think, is one of the best three-point shooters in the entire country. If he's wide open, he looks like Steph out there. Zach Martini is a good three-point shooter. Tyson Acuff is coming into his own. I think he was the seventh or eighth leading scorer in all of D1 college basketball last year. Rutgers picked him up in the offseason. So they have a lot of capable 3-point shooters. Jeremiah Williams, JaMychal Davis, two Rutgers veterans. So yeah, there's you definitely got to worry about 3-point shooting if you're an Indiana fan, because Rutgers is very capable of bearing from deep.
I didn't even realize the numbers were that bad. I've watched like maybe like 2 or 3 minutes of the last two non-conference games. I listen a lot to the radio. Ironically enough, the guy on Chattanooga who hit like 5 or 6 threes, was it Hunter Huff? Was that his name? Ian?
Let me check.
I think that was Huff.
Yes.
I sat next to him on the plane that night coming home on the
Oh,
East Coast. I had no idea who it was. I didn't watch the game, and I saw this guy, and I was like very much taller than him. I sit next to him, and then I'm like, I assume you're on the basketball team. I go, oh yeah. I go, yeah, I'm from IU. Sorry about that. And he goes, I'm not mad at all. We almost beat them. I look on my phone. I'm like in the corner like this. I'm like, oh my God, this is the guy who hit 5 or 6 threes or whatever. I was like, oh my goodness, he's hit more threes than Indiana has in the last like 2 weeks.
yeah,
But
he
that
was
was that
six
was
for
pretty fun.
12.
So I was like, I had no idea. I was gonna ask him as a joke. I'm like, you weren't the guy that hit 5 or 6 threes, right? I'm like, there's no way this guy who's like tall, lanky, like kind of like me, a few inches shorter. I'm like, there's no way this guy actually like really played and actually like played well. And I'm like, holy smokes, this guy really hit 5 threes. So I was pretty quiet the rest of the flight. I'm like, this guy almost just gave IU a bad loss. So that was pretty funny. Regardless, Indiana's known for obviously playing two bigs. Thomas, you know this from last year. We don't know what Umar Ballo, the whole situation about the last game. Where was he? Where wasn't he? What injury does he have? I mean, if he does play, God, let's hope so. Obviously, Indiana has two bigs. You know what Renew is like. How is Rutgers? How do they go up against that? And how do they try and deal with that? Because obviously, no Cliff Omori and one of the other guys that went to Miami, Ohio. Obviously, you mentioned Rutgers, only three guys returning, so they lost a ton. And Omori did pretty well against IU defensively. How does Rutgers defend against IU's two bigs, assuming Ballo plays?
Yeah, that I'm gonna say that's probably Indiana's should be Indiana's strongest point of attack, especially with the 3-point shooting struggles they've had. Rutgers is somewhat small. They have their two tallest players are 6'10". Emmanuel Obole, who starts on the team as their starting center, but he's been playing around like 15 minutes a game. And then Ace Bailey, who's also 6'10", but I think he's like 210 pounds. So Indiana definitely has the advantage in the front court, and they should take advantage of that. And then Umar Bala, one of the best centers in the country. I'm not sure what's going on with him. I was seeing some stuff on Twitter, but again, like you said, hopefully for you guys, hopefully he plays. And then Malik Renew, he was terrific last year. I think he's having another strong season. They lost Kuliaware, obviously, but Balo is a nice replacement for him. So yeah, I'd say that's probably their biggest advantage against Rutgers. And they're gonna have to be physical. I wouldn't say Rutgers is the most physical team. They like to get downhill and score in the paint as much as possible, but I from my understanding, I'd say Indiana is a little bit more physical, at least last year. So that's probably their biggest advantage that they should utilize as best they can. Um, Let me see. Lathan Somerville is another freshman for Rutgers. You guys may or may not have heard of. He's been having a really strong season against Columbia. He had 11 points off the bench in 19 minutes, 5 of 7 shooting, 5 rebounds. So I would say that's Indiana's biggest advantage. If Renew and Balo can get going, that'll probably give Rutgers some problems. They might have to rely on 3-point shooting a little bit. Yeah, yeah,
I think that's going to be interesting to look at with the pace of this game because at least of what I've seen of Rutgers, they play a little bit faster than Indiana does, which most teams do. But if Indiana is using those two big lineups and trying to eat up time in the shot clock, work down low for a good shot, I think that could play into Rutgers' hands where they could just, off a miss, just play fast, get in a fast break opportunity and wear those two bigs out, get them in foul trouble. I could see that being a real possibility here.
yeah. And like you mentioned, yeah, Rutgers definitely likes to play fast. Monday night against Columbia, they had 14 points off of forced turnovers. They had 18 points on the fast break that accounted for 20% of their total points. So these guys like to run, and they're lengthy, they're quick. They have very good guard play, which I know Indiana has good guard play this year as well. But that's definitely a good point to look at. These guys like to run, get the rebound, and get down as quick as possible and get those easy ones.
The teams that Indiana has struggled against this year are teams that do push the tempo. I mean, you think about teams that shoot the basketball really well. Think of the Louisville Cardinals, and we all know how that game ended. Ended with like 10 minutes to go in the game. That's how much of a one-sided it was. And I was just really struggled in the past against teams that will play four out and haven't been able to utilize that size advantage down low. I guess for Rutgers, kind of 1-1 in Big Ten play, kind of a mixed bag a little bit in non-conference play. You mentioned a few games that they should have back, but kind of what is kind of the goal for Rutgers? Obviously, get back to the tournament, but kind of how are they viewing Indiana in a sense in getting ready? I know that the first game after the new year can always be a struggle at times, but then yet again, both teams with kind of a shorter turnaround.
Yeah, I know they're not taking Indiana lightly. I'll tell you that. Big Ten play is Big Ten play. It's very different from their non-conference games. And I expect this to be a really, really good game. I think it's two teams that are kind of underperforming a little bit, but definitely still have a lot of basketball in front of them and have an agenda. And that agenda is to get back to March Madness, and they want to both win as many games as possible. This is a very winnable game, in my opinion, for both teams. It's just a matter of will those facets we talk about click? Can Indiana dominate in the paint and with their big men, or will Rutgers outrun them and knock down all their threes? I'm expecting a very good game. I'm looking forward to it. Rutgers, um, I'd say Rutgers is ready for Indiana as best as they can. Like they just came off a 27-point win. They have two Big Ten games under their belt already. They're 1-1, as you mentioned. Um, so they're expecting everything Indiana's got. They know what it's like to play in a madhouse environment. Obviously, at the rack. This time they'll be on the receiving end of it at Assembly Hall. Um, but yeah, I mean it's a Big Ten game. Peichel talks a lot about Big Ten and how strong the play is, and it's hard to win on the road. So I think they're coming off a nice, comfortable 27-point win, but they shouldn't be sitting comfortable, obviously, with Indiana and Big Ten coming up. So we'll see. I'm expecting a really, really good game.
I think the trend is going to continue of the Power Five teams going within 5 points, whichever way it is. I think it's going to offset of Rutgers 3-point shooting to Indiana's paint dominance. Um, and I think both teams will just play to their strengths and that will even out over time. And I think it's going to come down to the wire. I'm going to be honest. I think it'll be a one possession, maybe at the max 4 or 5 point game. I don't think the crowd's going to be as bad as people make it out to be because one, it hasn't really been good all year, and two, the students aren't going to be there. So um, that will help Rutgers, I do think, and I think it's going to come down to one or two possessions, whichever way that may be.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I didn't even think about students not being there. I mean, I thought about it in terms of myself, and unfortunately, I won't get to see all you guys. But yeah, from a game perspective, that will play a big part. I remember last year's game. I forget who Indiana was playing, but the game when the students weren't in town was dramatically. I'm blanking on the outcome and who they were playing, so this might just be useless information. But it was a big difference crowd wise in terms of students play a massive part, as I mentioned at the rack. They're like a sixth man for them, and it's the same thing in Assembly Hall. So that's a good point you bring up. I'm just looking to see how many 5 point or less outcomes Rutgers has had this year. There's been a few. Um, Merrimack, or no, sorry, Kennesaw State, as I mentioned, they lost by two. Notre Dame, they won by one in overtime. Alabama, they lost by five. Texas A&M, they lost by four. Penn State, they beat by four. Seton Hall, they won on that buzzer beater three. Princeton, they lost by one. So that's like 6 or 7 games I just mentioned right there that are within a 5 point outcome. I expect Indiana to be another similar one. Um, yeah, I think it's going to come down to the last couple minutes. A lot of Rutgers' outcomes have come down to the last couple minutes, whether that's giving it their all and coming out with the win or just falling short and the other team outperformed them. But it should be another good one. I think these guys match up fairly well, just in different parts of their games. It should be a good one.
This just brings me right back to, we're talking about close Rutgers matchups at Assembly Hall, and I think of Ron Harper Jr. coming off right after the Parker Stewart three in the corner and just complete devastation from there. But that I just had to bring that up. I just thought
Yeah,
it was
it's funny you mentioned that. That's so when Dylan Harper hit his buzzer beater, that was like the first comparison was which one? Well, they actually compared it to two. One was that Ron Harper shot against Indiana, and then the other was Ron Harper shot against Purdue, the buzzer beater from half court. They asked Dylan which one he thought was better, comparing the Purdue one and his against Seton Hall, and he said he thought his was more impactful because it was in-state Garden State rivalry. They're playing for the Garden State trophy, but Purdue's was obviously probably a bigger shot. It was from half court and it was against the number one team in the country, so it was really cool. But yeah, Ron Harper against Indiana. That one was also brought up after the Seton Hall game. And I think it was Durham mentioned that in my replies or something at some point. But yeah, it's funny you bring that up. That'll definitely be on their mind, certainly on Dylan Harper's mind entering Thursday's game.
I will not be excited when they run that clip back on the broadcast at some point because you know it's going to come up no matter what the score is in the situation. That shot will be played. I forgot it's an 8:30 tip on or was it Thursday night? Is it tomorrow night when you guys are listening, watching this? All right, biggest question here, Thomas. We're gonna have a Rutgers pull over IU, shirt underneath. What do we got here? I mean, are we ready to, go get crowd surf at the end if Indiana wins? No, okay. What's how much are you actually gonna pull for Indiana here? I don't know. What's the fandom here? How much split is the fandom?
It's funny, like this is my most anticipated game of the year. I was really looking forward to it, really looking forward to going back to Bloomington. It's funny that it's like home for me, but also enemy territory. I don't even know what to address it as, but I I'm working for Rutgers. I'm working for Rutgers. Maybe if my a wave of wind gets my shirt, you guys will see a Indiana shirt under it. I'm not sure who I'm rooting for. Like I'm working with Rutgers. It's hard to say I'm rooting against them, but at the same time, I'm an IU graduate. I spent 5 years there. It's kind of a win-win game for me. It's also kind of a lose-lose game for me, but I'm looking at the win-win side of it. And I'm just looking forward to a really fun game. Um, and yeah, I don't know. I don't want to get in trouble if I answer your question honestly.
Yeah, Jose Mourinho. If I speak him in big trouble, the less you talk, the better. It's everything I had, Ian. You got anything else?
that's it for me.
How much IU basketball have you actually kind of consumed this year, I guess, finally? Kind of what are your thoughts on the Hoosiers so far? 10-3. Obviously, the non-conference schedule kind of straightforward, and they didn't really impress in the games they needed to, but kind of how much IU hoops have you been able to consume, and what are your assessment after really half the season?
Yeah, I've watched as much as I can. Probably like at least half of their games I've been able to watch, maybe a little bit more. I didn't see the game against Winthrop, which I'd like to have because it's obviously the game before this game. But
You didn't miss much.
No,
yeah, it sounded like I didn't miss much on Twitter. But glad you guys came out with the win. Yeah, I like I don't know. At terms, I'm seeing so many similar things to last year in a negative way. That trip to Atlantis, I wish I didn't turn on the TV. But at other times they look good. And I think they're scoring a lot as far as I can tell. And they obviously have a lot of new transfers similar to Rutgers. So it's gonna take some time to connect. Those guys are super highly skilled. I talk about Balo being one of the best centers in the country, and Goody's a good 3-point shooter, and the other guys. Um, it takes some time to connect. I do think they're going to be playing better than they have been playing to start the season. At least I'd like to hope so. Um, but yeah, their guard play is going to be really important. I know Miles Rice and Carlisle have been on and off for you guys. Rice, I saw just came off an 18-point game that looked pretty good. Um, but yeah, I haven't seen as much as I'd like to. I've seen about 50%. I'm gonna keep up with them as much as I can. They've had a couple game nights on the same night as Rutgers, but I don't know. Some things remind me of last year in a bad way, but other times they look really good. I think their 3-point shooting is better than last year. Is hard to be worse, but I don't know. You also mentioned how they've been doing recently, so I don't even know if I should be saying that, but it should be a good game. It should be a good game. Both these guys were both these teams were preseason top 25 teams. They're both looking to get back to that mark. They're both very capable of doing so. They just got to get as many wins as they can, and this is a really good opportunity for both of them. So we'll just have to see.
I'll share my thoughts here, at least on the recent play. Austin, we talked about what our non-conference hopes would be as far as how strong of wins that Indiana would need. And I bumped my number up to 20 or 25 points for these last two games. And I did not get that. In the Chattanooga game, Indiana's largest lead, let's see, was um here we go. Indiana's largest lead was 13. Against Winthrop, Indiana's largest lead was 9. And Winthrop shot 38% from the field and only lost by single digits. I do not think that is a good recipe for a win. Now, granted, Umar Balla wasn't playing, and we don't know what's going on there. A little more clarity would have been nice, because you do not want to leave Indiana basketball fans up to speculation because that does not ever go well. Um, and then Chattanooga also shot 41% and lost by 9. So two teams that did not shoot the ball well, losing by single digits. That's not going to pass in the Big Ten, especially when you shoot 1 for 20 from three. And I think they missed 20 in a row after making their first one against Winthrop. So, I would love to be proved wrong in the Big Ten slate, but as it stands right now, I'm not feeling too good.
I gotta ask. I again I missed the Winthrop game, but what happened? I know they ended up winning by 9, if I'm not mistaken. So I think they pulled away in the last couple minutes. So what was that game kind of like?
It was just a close, messy game the whole way. It was 69-68 Indiana with a couple minutes to go, and they closed it on a NATO run in the last 3 minutes.
Okay.
So the 9-point win is a little bit more than what you would probably think. Um, but there was no rhythm to the game. There was no identity in the offense on either team, really. I mean, Winthrop did not, they shot 38% from the field, 6 for 23. That's 26% from three. Both teams shot 70% or below from the free throw line on high volume. Um, I mean, this is just your typical recent Indiana non-conference basketball game of just get through it and move on to the next one.
Gotcha.
It's kind of been the theme this year. It's kind of Indiana pulls away. They don't play well for 32 minutes, or they maybe have a good stretch in the first half, and they'll let the lead kind of slip at half, and then they pull away in the last 4 or 8 minutes in certain situations. It was like that against Miami, Ohio. They didn't play well against. Winthrop's the same way. There's kind of been a lot of occasions where it's like, all right, Indiana does not start out strong or does not finish the half strong and has to actually like focus in the second half, which was the same issue last year, except I think it was just worse in the first few games of the year. But Indiana at least has won most of these games by double digits, but they just have not played well. And feels like IU's kind of desperate for a marquee like statement victory because the only other game they really played well for 40 minutes was against Minnesota, and they're supposed to be at the bottom of the Big Ten. So I mean, it's like there's no continuity really with this team, and it's like Indiana needs like 12 or 13 wins in the Big Ten, and the way they play on the road, it's like I don't know if they're going to get more road wins than they are going to lose more times at home. So it's like Indiana can really afford, I think, one loss at home the rest of the year. And I mean, you got both Purdue and Illinois coming to town, and Rutgers, a team that can shoot it from outside. It's like this could get dicey pretty quickly. And we all said, oh, this team is going to be closer than the ones it was 2 years ago than last year, the beginning of the year. And now, as the clock is about to strike midnight when we're recording this, or at least a few hours away, Indiana is like, okay, this is like a season that is more like last year, as you said, Thomas, than it was the year before. So that's just kind of where it's been like right now. And we know Indiana fans and their love of Mike Woodson is declining rapidly as we speak.
Yeah, well, they are coming off a win. Rutgers coming off a win. They both need another win. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. It's my most anticipated game. I'll say it again. Um, I can't wait to be back in Bloomington, back at Assembly Hall.
All right. That'll wrap it up here for the first episode of 2025 in the House of Hoosier podcast. Keep it tuned to our socials. We'll post some clips there spontaneously throughout the year. It's Big Ten season. Indiana needs some wins. And Thomas, thanks a lot for joining the show. Enjoy your trip back to Bloomington. I know I wish we could be there to say hello to you, but enjoy Assembly Hall. And we're hoping for a good game. And at least for Ian and I's sake, we're hoping for an IU win. But